The water gardens of Thesara burned beneath alien fire, and Ambassador Veeth watched his world die from the council chamber deep below the northern ocean. The Kral Dominion had come 3 cycles ago with their massive warships and their cruel demands, and when the Thesaran Council refused to surrender their independence, the bombardment began. Veeth's webbed hands trembled as he reviewed the casualty reports scrolling across his data screen, and the numbers climbed higher with each passing hour, until they stopped meaning anything at all and became just light on a display. The Thesarans were a peaceful people who had spent 10,000 years perfecting their art and philosophy and music, and they had believed that culture and reason would protect them from the violence of the younger species. They were wrong. The Kral cared nothing for the crystal symphonies that the Thesaran composers had crafted over centuries, and they laughed at the philosophical treaties that had brought peace to a dozen nearby systems, and they burned the floating museums that held artwork older than most spacefaring civilizations. Council leader Morpheth floated at the center of the chamber, with her color patches flickering the deep purple of grief and despair, and she spoke in the harmonic language of their people. "We have sent distress signals to 47 species across the sector," she said, and her voice carried the weight of defeat, "and we have received 32 responses." Veeth felt his throat sacs deflate, because he knew what was coming next. "All of them said no," Morpheth continued, and their colors shifted to the gray of acceptance. The Valthari said they could not risk war with the Kral, and the Syndicate said they had no resources to spare, and the Federation said our situation was unfortunate, but not their concern. Around the chamber, the other council members made sounds of distress and sorrow, and Veeth watched his people break under the reality that the galaxy would let them die rather than face the Kral. "There are still species who have not responded," a young counselor named Pilot said, and his colors showed the green of desperate hope. "Perhaps someone will help us." Morpheth did not answer, but her colors told the truth that they all knew, and the silence stretched long and heavy, until it was broken by a sharp tone from the communications array. The communications officer, whose name was Sithra, jerked in surprise, and her colors flashed confusion. "Council leader," she said, and her voice was uncertain, "we have a response from a species called humans." Veeth had never heard of humans, and judging by the confused colors around the chamber, neither had anyone else. "Where are they located?" Morpheth asked. "According to their transmission, they are from a system called Sol, approximately 130 light-years from here," Sithra replied, and she manipulated the data. "Controls. They only made contact with the greater galactic community 40 cycles ago." A young species then, and Veeth felt his hope die, because young species never involve themselves in conflicts with established powers like the Kral. "What is their response?" Morpheth asked, and her colors showed she expected another refusal. Sithra played the message, and a being appeared on the main display, and Veeth studied the strange creature, with its bilateral symmetry, and its oddly mobile face, and its lack of proper color-changing skin. The human spoke in a language the translators struggled with before finding proper correlation. "This is Ambassador Williams of the Human Diplomatic Corps, responding to the Thesaran distress call," the human said, and its face held an expression Veeth could not read. "We have reviewed your situation, and we understand that the Kral Dominion has invaded your homeworld, and that you are seeking sanctuary for your people." "Comes," thought Veeth, and he prepared himself for the polite words that would mean abandonment. "We will help," the human said simply. "Send us the coordinates of a safe evacuation point, and prepare your people for transport. And our fleet is already moving to your position." The chamber erupted in sounds of shock and confusion, and Veeth felt his color patches flash through a dozen emotions before settling on disbelief. "Already moving," Pilot said, and his voice rose with excitement. "They said their fleet is already coming." Morpheth raised her primary manipulators for silence, and the chamber quieted. "Sithra, establish a direct link with the human ambassador," she commanded. The connection was made, and the human's face reappeared, and now Veeth could see that the creature looked tired, as though it had not rested in some time. "Ambassador Williams, this is Council Leader Morpheth," she said, and her colors showed cautious hope. "Correctly, that you are willing to provide sanctuary for our people." "That is correct," the human replied, and it made a gesture with its head that the translators identified as a nod. "We received your distress call 6 hours ago and immediately dispatched a relief fleet from our nearest naval base." 6 hours, Veeth said before he could stop himself. "But that means your ships left before you even knew if we would accept your offer." The human turned its eyes toward Veeth, and he saw something in that alien gaze that made his dorsal fins rise. "Someone asked for help," the human said. "That was all we needed to know." Morpheth's colors cycled through confusion and wonder. "We must ask what you expect in return," she said, "because nothing in the galaxy came without cost. What resources or territories or concessions do you require?" The human was quiet for a moment before responding. "We expect nothing," it said. "You asked for refuge, and we are here, giving it freely." "Freely," Morpheth repeated, and her colors showed she did not believe it. "My people have a saying," the human continued. "We leave no one behind, and that includes species we have never met, because someone asking for help deserves an answer." Veeth wanted to believe the human, but 47 refusals had taught him that mercy was rare in the galaxy. "How many of our people can you take?" Morpheth asked. The human checked something beyond the view of the display. "All of them," it said. The chamber fell completely silent, and Veeth felt his respiratory system freeze. "All," Morpheth said weakly. "Our current fleet consists of 73 vessels, including construction ships, hospital ships, colony transports, and support craft," the human explained. "We estimate we can evacuate your entire population of 200,000 within a standard week and begin construction of permanent habitats within 2 weeks. LP, construction," Pilith said, and his colors blazed with hope. "You are building us a new home." The human made another one of those nods. "Refuge is not just escape," it said. "Refuge means safety and home and future, and we intend to provide all three." Morpheth looked around the chamber at her fellow counselors, and Veeth saw the colors of desperate hope beginning to replace the gray of despair. "We accept your offer," Morpheth said, and her voice was steady, despite the emotion colors radiating from her skin. "And we are grateful beyond words." "Save your gratitude," the human said, and its expression changed to something harder. "Our fleet will arrive in your system in 36 hours, and we will begin evacuation immediately. But Council Leader Morpheth, you should know that our fleet includes military vessels." Veeth felt cold water run through his gills, because military vessels meant war. And war meant the humans would draw a crawl. "Why warships?" he asked. The human looked directly at him again. "Because refuge means something to humans," it said, and its voice carried absolute certainty. "It means you are under our protection now, and we take that seriously." The transmission ended, and the chamber remained silent for a long moment before Pilith spoke. "Are they insane?" he asked. "The crawl will destroy them." But Veeth was remembering the look in the human's eyes and the certainty in its voice, and he wondered if perhaps the crawl had just made a terrible mistake. "Perhaps," Morpheth said, and her colors showed cautious hope. "Or perhaps we are about to learn what humans are truly capable of." Above them, the bombardment continued, and the water gardens burned, but for the first time in 3 cycles, the Thesserans had something they thought they had lost forever. The human fleet arrived exactly when they said they would, and Veeth watched the sensor displays with growing disbelief as ship after ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Thesseron system. 73 vessels, just as the human ambassador had promised, but the scale of them made Veeth's gills flutter with anxiety. The construction ships alone were larger than anything the Thesserons had ever built, and they came equipped with fabrication bays and material processors, and swarms of smaller craft that moved between them like schools of mechanical fish. The hospital ships were brilliant white, with red markings that the humans explained was an ancient symbol for medical aid, and each one could hold thousands of patients, with medical facilities that made Thesseron healers look like primitive practitioners. The colony transports were massive hollow cylinders designed to carry entire populations in comfort, with living quarters and food synthesis systems and recreational facilities, because the humans understood that refugees were still people who needed more than just survival. Then there were the warships. Veith counted 23 of them, ranging from small, fast patrol craft to massive vessels the humans called dreadnoughts. And every single one bristled with weapons systems that the Thesseran sensors could barely classify. They brought an invasion fleet, Counselor Harrod said, and his colors flickered with fear. We have traded one conqueror for another. But Morpheth was studying the formation, and her colors showed thoughtful consideration. Look at the positioning, she said. The warships are arranged in a defensive perimeter around the civilian vessels, and they are placing themselves between us and the Kral occupation forces. She was right, and Veith felt his fear shift to confused wonder, because the humans had positioned their military assets to protect both their own civilian ships, the Thesseran homeworld. A communication request came through, and Morpheth accepted it, and the display showed a human female wearing a dark blue uniform with insignia that the translators identified as military rank. Council Leader Morpheth, I am Captain Sarah Chen, commander of the Human Relief Fleet, the woman said, and her voice carried the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. We are ready to begin operations, and I wanted to brief you on our plans. We are listening, Captain Chen, Morpheth replied. The human manipulated something, and a tactical display appeared, showing the Thesseran system, with overlays and projections. We will establish Haven Station here in orbit around Thessera 2, Chen said, and she indicated the system's uninhabited moon. Your moon has low gravity and no atmosphere but sufficient mass to anchor a major orbital habitat. You are building a station, Veith said, not taking us to an existing human colony. Turned her attention to him, and he saw her eyes were dark and intelligent. You are not refugees being given temporary shelter, she said. You are a people who deserve a permanent home, and we are going to build it. Pilith made a sound of wonder. How long will construction take, he asked. Preliminary estimates suggest the basic structure will be complete in 4 weeks, Shen replied. Full completion with all amenities and safety systems will take approximately 3 months. Impossible, Harrod said flatly. A habitat for 200,000 people cannot be built in 3 months. Shen smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. Counselor, you are about to learn that humans do not build things slowly when lives are at stake, she said. Our construction crews have already begun fabricating the primary structural elements, and our engineers have been designing modular habitat sections for the past 30 hours. Display showing a massive ring-shaped structure. Haven Station will consist of 6 primary rings, each capable of housing 40,000 individuals, she explained. The rings will rotate to provide gravity and contain everything from living quarters to medical facilities to recreation areas to hydroponic gardens. Hydroponic gardens, Morpheth said, and her colors showed surprise. You are creating farms. You need to eat, Chen said simply, and we have studied Thesseran dietary requirements and nutritional needs, and our agricultural specialists are already growing the algae strains and aquatic plants your people consume. Veith felt something tight in his chest loosen, because these humans were not just offering escape, but were planning for every detail of Thesseran life. The evacuation will begin in 6 hours, Chen continued. We will start with the most vulnerable populations, including the injured and the very young and the elderly. Everyone through the hospital ships for medical screening. Medical screening? Harith asked suspiciously. To identify anyone who needs immediate treatment, Chen explained, and to ensure no one is carrying diseases that could spread in the close quarters of the evacuation ships. She paused, and her expression softened slightly. "I know you have no reason to trust us," she said, "but I give you my word as a human officer that we are here to help and nothing more." Morphet's colors cycled through several emotions before settling on determination. "We accept your plan, Captain Chen," she said, "and we will begin preparing our people for evacuation." "Thank you, Council Leader," Chen replied. "My staff will coordinate with your people on the logistics." The transmission ended, and the council chamber was silent for a moment before Harith spoke. "They are too organized," he said. "No species can mobilize this quickly." But Veith was thinking about the human ambassador's words about their fleet already moving before they knew if the Thesserans would accept. "I think," he said slowly, "that humans have done this before." Over the next 6 hours, Veith watched as the human operation unfolded with precision that bordered on frightening. The hospital ships moved into low orbit and began receiving Thesseran evacuees in organized waves, with medical staff ready to process each arrival. The construction ships took up positions around the moon and began assembling the skeleton of Haven Station, with industrial fabricators working at speeds that seemed impossible. The warships maintained their defensive perimeter, and Veith noticed they were constantly scanning the system and running what appeared to be combat drills. Young Pillith had volunteered to be among the first wave of evacuees, and he sent back messages describing the human hospital ships. "They treat us like we matter," said. "The medical staff remember our names, and they have created water tanks filled with the correct salinity for our skin. And they even play Thesseron music in the corridors, because they researched what would make us comfortable." Veith read the message to the council, and saw colors of amazement ripple through the chamber. "Why do they care so much?" Harith asked, and for the first time his colors showed confusion rather than suspicion. "What do they gain from treating refugees with such consideration?" Morpheth was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Perhaps," she said, "they care because they are capable of caring, and they help because they believe it is right, and not everything requires a profit motive." On the 3rd day of evacuation, Veith himself was scheduled for transport, and he rode a shuttle up from the ocean depths with 30 other Thesserons, and watched his dying world fall away below them. The human shuttle pilot was a young male, introduced himself as Lieutenant Rodriguez, and he spoke to them in careful Thesseron. "I know this is scary," he said. "Leaving your home is never easy, but I promise you that my people will keep you safe." One of the other Thesserons was a child, barely old enough to have developed her color patches, and she asked the question they were all thinking. "Why are you helping us?" she asked in her high fluting voice. Rodriguez turned at his seat and looked at the child with an expression of such gentle compassion that Veith felt his throat sacs tighten. "Because someone asked for help," he said, "and because you deserve better than what the crawl gave you, and because my ancestors were refugees once, and someone helped them." The shuttle docked with one of the hospital ships, and Veith was processed through medical screening by a human doctor who examined him with gentle efficiency and declared him healthy despite the stress markers. The doctor said, and she smiled, "We will take care of you." That night, Veith stood in an observation lounge aboard the hospital ship and looked out at the growing structure of Haven Station. The skeleton was already visible, and construction drones swarmed over it like glowing insects, and welding torches flared in the darkness like small stars being born. A human engineer stood nearby, watching the same scene, and Veith approached him hesitantly. "Excuse me," Veith said, "may I ask you something?" The engineer turned and nodded. "Why are you doing all this?" Veith asked. "Your people could have given us transport to some distant world and fulfilled your promise of refuge, but instead, you are building us a home." The engineer was quiet for a moment, and then he pointed at the growing station. "On Earth we have a saying," he said, "home is not a place, but a feeling of belonging and safety, and we wanted to give you that feeling." At Veith directly. "Refuge is not charity," he continued. "It is an obligation, and humans learned a long time ago that we are only as strong as our willingness to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Veith looked back at the station being built by beings his people had never met until days ago. "What happens when the Crawl come?" he asked. "Because they will come." The engineer's expression hardened. "Then they will learn what it means to threaten those under human protection," he said, and his voice carried certainty and something that might have been anticipation. "And I do not think they will enjoy the lesson." Veith watched the construction continue through the night, and for the first time since the Crawl invasion began, he allowed himself to believe that perhaps his people had a future after all. Pillith floated in the observation bubble of Haven Station's partially completed Ring 3 and watched the construction crews work in the airless void beyond the transparent aluminum. The humans moved with practiced efficiency in their bulky spacesuits, and they wielded tools that cut and welded and assembled the massive habitat sections with precision that seemed almost artistic. A human floated past the bubble and noticed Pillith watching, and the human waved before returning to work on a hull section, and Pillith found himself waving back, even though he knew the gesture was not part of Thesseron communication. "They never stop," a voice said behind him, and Pillith turned to see Ambassador Veith floating into the observation area. The construction crews work in shifts of 12 hours, and then they rest for 6, and then they return for another 12. "Do they not exhaust themselves?" Pillith asked. "I asked one of the engineers that same question," replied, and his colors showed bemusement. "He told me that humans are capable of extraordinary endurance when they are motivated by purpose, and apparently building homes for refugees qualifies as worthy purpose." Pillith looked back at the workers, assembling what would become living quarters for his people. "I still do not understand why they care so much," he admitted. Veith was quiet for a moment before responding. "I have been studying human history," he said, "and I have learned that their species has endured terrible conflicts and displacements and genocides throughout their existence, and perhaps that suffering taught them to recognize it in others." A construction supervisor named Marcus Chen drifted into the observation bubble to check some readings on a nearby panel, and he noticed the two Thesserans watching. "Morning, gentlemen," he said in cheerful Thesseran, though the translator struggled with his accent. "Not. It is remarkable," Pillith said. "I have never seen construction at this speed." Marcus laughed, and his face showed an expression the translators identified as pride. "This is actually slower than we would prefer," he said, "but we are building to last centuries, not just decades, so we are being thorough." "How many of your people are working on the station?" Veith asked. Marcus checked his datapad. "Currently we have 2,347 construction personnel," he said, "plus another 800 engineers and designers and logistics staff, and that does not count the medical teams or the military personnel." "Over 3,000 humans," Pillith said, and his colors flickered with wonder, "all here to help us." "Well, we couldn't very well leave you homeless, could we?" Marcus replied, as though it was the most obvious thing in the galaxy. An alarm chimed softly, and Marcus checked his pad again. "But I need to get back to work," he said. "We are installing the water circulation systems in Ring 4 today, and I want to ensure everything meets Thesseron specifications." He pushed off toward the exit, but paused. "You should come by the medical bay later," he added. "Dr. Okafor wanted to discuss some modifications to the health monitoring systems, and she values Thesseron input." After Marcus left, Pillith turned to Veith. "They ask for our input," he said. "They are building us a home, and yet they ask what we want." "Because they respect us," Veith replied simply, "and because they understand that charity without dignity is just another form of cruelty." Pillith decided to take Marcus up on his suggestion, and made his way through the partially completed corridors to the medical bay, where the humans had established their primary treatment facility. The bay was a marvel of organized efficiency, with treatment pods designed specifically for Thesseron physiology, and water tanks maintaining precise salinity, and monitoring systems that tracked everything from skin hydration to neural activity. Dr. Okafor was a tall human female with dark skin and kind eyes, and she greeted Pilith with a warm smile. "Ah, Pilith, excellent timing," she said. "I wanted to ask you about seasonal color changes in Thessaron physiology." "Seasonal changes," Pilith repeated uncertainly. "Yes, your medical records indicate that Thessaron skin patches undergo cyclic variations based on your homeworld's seasonal patterns," Okafor explained. "And I want to ensure our health monitoring systems can distinguish between normal seasonal changes and potential disease symptoms." She pulled up a display showing complex biological data. "We have been studying Thessaron biology extensively," she continued, "but there is no substitute for input from someone who actually experiences these changes." Discussing the subtleties of Thessaron color change patterns, and Dr. Okafor listened with genuine interest and took detailed notes and asked intelligent questions. "Your people are very thorough," Pilith said when they finished. "Lives depend on getting the details right," Okafor replied, "and your lives matter to us." "Why?" Pilith asked, and the question came out more desperately than he intended. "Why do we matter to you?" Okafor set down her datapad and looked at him directly. "On Earth we have a saying," she said. "We leave no one behind, and that is not just words, but a fundamental principle of human society." She gestured around the medical bay. "My ancestors were brought to another continent in chains," she said quietly, "and they suffered for generations before they were free. And I grew up hearing stories about how they survived, because people helped them, even when it was dangerous to do so." Her expression grew intense. "So, when I see a people who are suffering through no fault of their own, I do not see strangers," she continued. "I see my ancestors, and I see people who deserve the same help that kept my family alive." Pilith felt his throat sacs tighten with emotion. "I am sorry for what your ancestors endured," he said. "Do not be sorry," Okafor replied. "Instead, be grateful that you found humans who remember their history and who choose to be better than those who caused that suffering." Over the following weeks, Pilith watched Haven Station grow from skeletal framework to actual habitat, and he marveled at the transformation. The humans installed artificial gravity generators in each ring and brought them online with such smooth precision that Pilith barely felt the transition. They filled the water circulation systems with perfectly balanced synthetic seawater that felt almost identical to Thessaron oceans. They constructed hydroponic gardens that grew Thessaron food plants in carefully controlled environments. They built recreational facilities and learning centers and meditation chambers and gathering spaces. They thought of everything. Pilith befriended several human workers, including a young engineer named Sarah, who explained the philosophy behind their construction methods. "We are not just building a place to live," she said, as they toured a completed residential section. "We are building a community, and that requires more than just walls and life support." She showed him a large open area in Ring 2. "This will be your central plaza," she explained, "and we designed it based on traditional Thessaron gathering spaces, with water features and acoustic properties that enhance your harmonic communication." "You researched our architecture," Pilith said in amazement. "Of course," Sarah replied. "You cannot build a proper home for someone without understanding what home means to them." Evening, Pilith found Marcus working late on a challenging installation, and he offered to keep the human company. "Do you ever rest?" Pilith asked. Marcus laughed tiredly. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but there is always more to do, and I want to make sure everything is perfect for you and your people." "Why does it have to be perfect?" Pilith asked. "Surely functional would be sufficient." Marcus stopped working and turned to look at Pilith. "You asked us for refuge," he said seriously, "and that means we took responsibility for your well-being and your future and your happiness, and humans do not do things halfway when it matters." He gestured at the surrounding construction. "This station will be your home for generations," he continued, "and your children and their children will grow up here. and we want them to look around and feel safe and comfortable and proud." "Proud," Pilith repeated. "Yes, proud," Marcus confirmed, "because you deserve a home you can be proud of, and because we are building this place as a symbol that the galaxy is not entirely cruel." Later that night, Pilith stood in what would become the central plaza of Ring 2, and imagined it filled with Thesserons living their lives in safety. The humans had installed permanent lighting that mimicked Thesseron daylight cycles. They had created water features that sang with the harmonics of Thesseron music. They had even planted the seeds from the Thesseron water gardens salvaged before the final evacuation. This was not just refuge, thought Pilith, and this was not just charity. This was humans declaring that the Thesserons mattered, and that their culture was worth preserving, and that their future was worth building. And they were doing it while the rest of the galaxy watched, and while the Krall Dominion prepared its response, and while their own warships stood guard, knowing that violence was coming. "One behind," Pilith said softly in his own language, and then he repeated it in human standard. He was beginning to understand what those words meant. They meant that humans would build while others would run. They meant that humans would stand while others would hide. They meant that humans would fight while others would surrender. And they meant that the Thesserons were no longer alone. Above the moon the construction continued, and the station grew, and somewhere in the darkness the human warships waited for the inevitable confrontation. Because refuge meant something to humans, and they were about to prove it. The Krall Dominion fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, at the edge of the Thesseran system, with enough ships to conquer a dozen worlds, and Veeth watched the sensor displays with growing dread as the count climbed past 50 vessels. Warlord Kresh commanded the fleet from his flagship Relentless Fang, and he broadcast his message on all frequencies, with the arrogance of someone who had never known defeat. "Attention, human vessels," his voice rumbled through the speakers. "You are harboring property of the Krall Dominion, and you will surrender the Thesseran refugees immediately, or face destruction." Veeth was in the command center of Haven Station, alongside Captain Chen and the other human officers, and he watched their faces for signs of fear or hesitation. He saw neither. Chen stood at the tactical display with her hands clasped behind her back, and studied the Krall formation with clinical detachment. "Commodore, what is your assessment?" asked. The human military commander was a grizzled male named Commodore James Mitchell, and he had the look of someone who had seen combat before. "Standard Krall battle formation," he said. "Heavy cruisers in the vanguard, with lighter vessels screening the flanks. And they are relying on numerical superiority and intimidation." "Weaknesses?" Chen asked. "They assume we will retreat," Mitchell replied, "and their formation is optimized for pursuit, not for fighting an opponent who stands their ground." Chen nodded and opened a channel to Warlord Kresh. "Warlord Kresh, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Human Protection Fleet," she said, and her voice was calm and professional. "The Thesserans are not property, and they are under human protection, and you will withdraw from this system immediately." There was a long pause before Kresh responded, and when he did his voice carried disbelief. "You dare to give me orders," he said, "you who are barely spacefaring and who command a mere 20 vessels against my armada." "I command 23 warships," Chen corrected, "and I do not give orders lightly. So you have one chance, Warlord, and withdraw now, or face the consequences." Kresh laughed, and it was a cruel sound. "I will enjoy harvesting your bones, human," he said. "The Krall Dominion does not bow to threats from inferior species." Chen's expression did not change. "That was not a threat," she said. "That was a promise." She closed the channel and turned to Mitchell. "Commodore, you are weapons-free," she said. "All ships execute defensive pattern Sierra and protect Haven Station at all costs." "Aye, Captain," Mitchell replied, and began issuing orders to the human fleet. Veeth watched as the human warships moved from their patrol positions into a formation that placed them between the Krall fleet and Haven Station. and he noticed they were not running. The Krall fleet advanced, weapons charging, and Veef saw energy signatures building on their cruisers that indicated they were preparing to fire. "Captain," the tactical officer called out, "Krall fleet is entering weapons range." "Hold position," Chen ordered. The Krall opened fire with massive plasma cannons that could vaporize smaller ships in single hits. And Veef watched streams of superheated death streak across space toward the human vessels. The human ships scattered with impossible agility, and their point defense systems came alive, with streams of projectiles that intercepted the plasma bolts before they could connect. "Return fire," Chen said quietly. "All batteries." The human warships opened fire, and Veek saw weapons he had never encountered before. Railguns accelerated projectiles to significant fractions of light speed, and they punched through Krall shields like they were not there. Missile pods launched swarms of intelligent warheads that adapted their attack patterns in real time. Directed energy weapons carved through Krall armor with surgical precision. And the humans fought with a coordination that suggested they had trained for this exact scenario. 3 Krall cruisers destroyed, the tactical officer reported. 4 more heavily damaged. Warlord Kresh's voice came through on the channel again, but now there was less arrogance and more anger. "You will pay for that, human," he snarled. "All ships attack formation and crush them." The Krall fleet surged forward, abandoning their formation in favor of overwhelming numbers, and Veeth realized with horror that the Krall were willing to accept heavy losses to destroy the humans. "They are committing everything," Mitchell said. "They want to make an example of us." "Let them try," Shen replied. What followed was the most brutal space combat Veeth had ever witnessed. The Krall threw themselves at the human line with reckless aggression, and they died by the dozens. But they kept coming. A human destroyer took direct hits from 3 Krall cruisers, and Veeth watched in horror as the ship's hull breached and atmosphere vented into space. "Destroyer Valiant is lost," the communications officer reported, and her voice was tight with grief. "All hands." Chen's jaw clenched, but her voice remained steady. "Continue engagement," she ordered. The battle raged for hours, and Veeth watched as humans died defending people they had never known before. The destroyer Defiant took catastrophic damage protecting a hospital ship, and the captain stayed aboard to manually fire the weapons until the reactor went critical. The frigate Soul fought 3 Krall vessels simultaneously, and held them off long enough for reinforcements to arrive, but was destroyed in the process. The gunship Aurora rammed a Krall battlecruiser that was targeting Haven Station, and both vessels were consumed in the explosion. Human ship that fell, 2 or 3 Krall vessels died. The humans fought with terrifying efficiency, and they adapted to Krall tactics faster than the Krall could adjust. They used the gravity of the moon to slingshot around for devastating attack runs. They coordinated their fire to overwhelm shields on priority targets. They protected each other with interlocking fields of fire that turned space into a death trap for anything that entered. And they never retreated. Pillith had joined Veeth in the command center, and he watched with wide eyes as the humans demonstrated what his people had never possessed. The will to fight. "Why do they not run?" he whispered. "They could escape." "Because they promised to protect us," Veeth replied, "and humans keep their promises." Finally, after 4 hours of sustained combat, the Krall fleet began to waver. They had lost 31 ships destroyed, and another 15 severely damaged. Had lost 2 destroyers and several smaller vessels, but their remaining ships still fought with undiminished ferocity. Warlord Kresh tried one final gambit, and sent his remaining heavy cruisers in a direct assault on Haven Station. Captain Chen saw it coming. "All ships converge on the Krall vanguard," she ordered. "Do not let them reach the station." The human fleet moved as one, and they positioned themselves directly in the path of the Crawl assault, and they opened fire with everything they had. The space between the Crawl fleet and Haven Station became a wall of fire and metal and death. The lead Crawl cruiser exploded as concentrated railgun fire tore it apart. The second cruiser tried to evade and ran directly into a missile barrage that shredded its engines. The third cruiser actually reached the human line and was destroyed by point-blank fire from 4 human ships working in perfect coordination. Warlord Kresh watched his final assault collapse, and for the first time in his long career, he made a decision based on survival rather than pride. "All ships retreat," he ordered, and his voice carried the bitterness of defeat. "Withdraw from the system." The surviving Crawl vessels turned and fled toward the system's edge with their faster-than-light drives charging. The humans did not pursue. Chen stood at the tactical display and watched the Crawl flee, and her face showed no triumph, only exhaustion. "Status report," she said quietly. "Destroyer Valiant lost with all hands," Mitchell reported. "Destroyer Soul lost with all hands, and Gunship Aurora lost with all hands." He paused. "Total casualties are 307 personnel dead and 112 wounded." The command center fell silent. Veith looked at the display showing the debris field of destroyed ships, both human and Crawl, and he felt something break inside him. His colors flickered with grief. 300 humans died protecting my people. Chen turned to look at him, and her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "They died doing their duty," she said, "and they died knowing that 200,000 Thesserons would live because of their sacrifice." "But why?" Veith asked desperately. "Why would they die for strangers?" Chen was quiet for a moment before responding. "Because refuge means something to humans," she said, "and because some things are worth dying for, and protecting those who cannot protect themselves is one of them." She turned back to the display. "Begin search and rescue operations for any survivors," she ordered, "and prepare casualty notifications for the families." As the human fleet began the grim work of recovery, Veith floated to one of the observation windows and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, 300 human families were about to learn that their loved ones had fallen for a cause they did not fully know. Ones had died fighting for people they had never met. And somehow those humans would have to live with the knowledge that their family members had considered Thesseran lives worth more than their own. Veith pressed his manipulators against the window and let the tears flow freely down his face. The Thesserans had learned something terrible today. They had learned that humans meant every word they said. And they had learned that refuge to humans was not just sanctuary. It was a promise written in blood and fire. A promise that said, "You matter, and your lives have value, and we will die before we let you fall." Pilith floated beside him, and together they watched the human ships moving through the debris field, searching for survivors who would likely never be found. "We owe them everything," Pilith said quietly. "Yes," Veith agreed, "and we will never be able to repay them." But perhaps, thought Veith, that was the point. Humans did not help because they expected repayment. Perhaps they helped because they believed it was right. And perhaps that made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because they were violent, but because they were willing to die for their principles. 6 months had passed since the battle, and Haven Station was complete. Veith stood in the central plaza of Ring 2 and watched Thesseron children play in the water features, while their parents gathered in conversation clusters. And the scene was so normal that he sometimes forgot they were living on an artificial habitat, orbiting an uninhabited moon. The humans had finished construction ahead of schedule, and they had done so with such thoroughness that the station felt less like a refuge and more like a true home. Marcus Chen had kept his promise about perfection. Every detail had been considered, from the acoustic properties of the gathering spaces to the seasonal lighting that mimicked Thesseron day-night cycles, to the water gardens that now flourished with plants salvaged from the dying homeworld below. But perfection came at a cost. And that cost was memorialized in the wall that dominated the northern section of the plaza. 3 meters tall and 20 meters wide, and it was made of polished stone that the humans had somehow synthesized to match the color of Thessaron ocean floors. On that wall were inscribed 307 names, every human who had died defending Haven Station. Veith visited the wall every day, and today he was not alone. Captain Chen stood beside him in her dress uniform, and she reached out to touch one of the names with gentle fingers. Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez, she said quietly. He was 23 years old, and he had just gotten engaged to his girlfriend back on Earth. Veith remembered Rodriguez as the shuttle pilot who had told a frightened Thessaron child that he helped because his ancestors had been refugees. "I am sorry," Veith said inadequately. "Do not be sorry," Chen replied. "He died doing exactly what he wanted to do, and he saved lives, and that meant something to him." She moved along the wall, touching other names. P. Ensign Sarah Kowalski loved old Earth music and wanted to be a composer, she said. Commander James Okoye wrote poetry in his spare time, and Specialist Maria Santos was learning to speak Thessaron because she wanted to teach your children about human culture. P. Veith felt his throat sacs tighten as Chen recited the dreams and hopes of the dead. "They were not just soldiers," he said. "No," Chen agreed. "They were people with lives and families and futures, and they gave all of that up for you." She turned to look at Veith directly. "And they would do it again," she added, "because that is what humans do when we promise protection." Footsteps echoed across the plaza, and Pilith approached with a group of young Thesserons, who carried armfuls of bioluminescent flowers from the water gardens. "We wanted to honor them," Pilith said, "the humans who gave us this home." The young Thesserons began placing flowers at the base of the memorial wall, and they spoke the names of the dead in their harmonic voices, and the sound carried through the plaza like a prayer. Chen watched them with an expression that Veith had learned to recognize as profound emotion being carefully controlled. "They would appreciate this," she said. "Thank you." Later that afternoon, Veith attended a council meeting in the administration section of Haven Station, and the topic was integration. "We have been living here for 6 months, Councillor Morpheth said, and we have been entirely dependent on human support, and we need to discuss what happens next." "What do you mean, what happens next?" Councillor Harith asked. "The humans cannot stay here forever," Morpheth replied. "They have their own worlds and their own concerns, and eventually they will need to leave us to manage Haven Station ourselves." Veith noticed that several human administrators were present at the meeting, including Captain Chen, and he saw her exchange glances with her staff. "Actually," Chen said, "that is something we wanted to discuss with you." She activated a display showing various statistics and projections. "Over the past 6 months, we have been training Thessaran personnel to operate all major systems on Haven Station," she explained, "and we have been gradually transferring operational control to your people." "We know," Morpheth said, "and we are grateful, but the question remains, what happens when you leave?" Chen smiled slightly. "We are not leaving," she said. The council chamber fell silent. "I do not understand," Morpheth said carefully. "Haven Station is a joint human Thessaran facility now," Chen explained, "and we have been authorized by Earth government to establish a permanent diplomatic and military presence here." She pulled up another display showing personnel assignments. "We will be leaving a staff of approximately 500 humans, including diplomats, and teachers, and medical personnel, and a small military contingent to support the defensive systems." "But why?" Harith asked, and for once his suspicion seemed to have faded into genuine confusion. "Why would your people commit to a permanent presence here?" Chen looked around the council chamber at each of the Thessaron leaders. "Because you asked us for refuge, and we said yes, and that means something," she said. It means you are part of the human sphere of protection now, and we do not abandon our allies. Allies, Veeth repeated. Yes, allies, Chen confirmed. We did not save you just to leave you vulnerable, and we did not build this station just to walk away, and we certainly did not lose 300 people just to consider our obligation fulfilled. She paused. The humans who died defending you believed they were fighting for something important, she continued, and the best way we can honor them is by ensuring their sacrifice meant something permanent. Morpheus' colors cycled through several emotions before settling on something that looked like humbled gratitude. We do not deserve this, she said quietly. Perhaps not, Chen replied, but you have it anyway, because humans judge people by their need, not by whether they deserve help. Over the following months, Veeth watched as the human-Thessaran partnership deepened. Human teachers established schools where Thessaran children learned about both cultures. Thessaran engineers worked alongside human technicians to maintain the station's complex systems. Human doctors and Thessaran healers collaborated on medical advances that benefited both species. The military contingent that Chen had mentioned consisted of 3 patrol ships and 200 personnel, and they conducted regular drills with Thessaran volunteers who wanted to learn to defend their new home. Pilith was among those volunteers, and he came to Veeth one day bursting with excitement. You will not believe what the humans are teaching us, he said. They are showing us tactics and strategy, and they say we have natural advantages in 3-dimensional combat because of how we perceive space. Are you becoming a warrior? Veeth asked with some concern. I am becoming someone who can protect my home, Pilith replied. The humans taught me that there is no shame in being willing to fight for what matters. Veeth had to admit the young Thessaran had changed since the humans arrived, and he carried himself with confidence that would have been unthinkable in the pacifist society of old Thessara. Perhaps the humans were teaching them more than just combat tactics. Perhaps they were teaching them that survival required both compassion and strength. One evening, Veeth received an invitation to dine with Captain Chen in her private quarters, and he accepted with curiosity. Chen's quarters were modest, personalized with images of Earth and books in physical form, and a small plant growing in artificial sunlight. Thank you for coming, she said, as she gestured to a table set for 2. I wanted to talk to you privately. They ate a meal that Chen had prepared herself, using both human and Thessaran ingredients, and the conversation was pleasant and relaxed. Finally, Chen set down her utensils and looked at Veeth seriously. I am being reassigned, she said. Veeth felt his colors flash alarm. You are leaving? He asked. Not immediately, she replied. I will be here for another 3 months to transition command to Captain Williams, but yes, eventually, I will return to Earth. We will miss you, Veeth said, and he meant it deeply. I will miss you too, Chen said, but that is not why I wanted to talk, and I wanted to give you something. She pulled out a small container and opened it to reveal seeds. These are from Earth. Explained. They are water lilies and lotus flowers and aquatic plants that I think will grow well in your gardens, and I wanted you to have them, so that Haven Station could have a piece of Earth, just as Earth now has pieces of Thessara in our botanical gardens. Veeth accepted the container with trembling manipulators. Why give us this? He asked. Because home is not just about where you are, but about the connections you build, Chen replied, and these seeds represent the connection between our peoples. And when your children see these earth plants growing alongside Thessaran ones, they will remember that different species can create beauty together. Veeth looked down at the seeds. You have given us so much, he said, and we have given you so little in return. You gave us purpose, Chen corrected, and you reminded us why we explore the stars, and it is not for conquest or profit, but for moments like this, where we can help someone who needs. She smiled. Besides, she added, you are already repaying us by being good neighbors, and by teaching your children about compassion, and by building a culture that values both peace and the willingness to defend it. Is that enough? Veeth asked. It is more than enough, Chen assured him. The next day, Veeth stood before the Thessaron Council with a container of earth seeds. I propose we create a new garden, he said, one that mixes Thessaron and human plants as a symbol of our alliance. The council agreed unanimously, and work began on what would become known as the Garden of Two Worlds. Pilith volunteered to help with the planting, and Veeth worked alongside him, pressing seeds into specially prepared soil. Do you think our children will understand what these plants mean? Pilith asked. I think they will grow up in a station built by humans and defended by human sacrifice, Veeth replied. That the galaxy contains both cruelty and compassion, and it is our choice which one we embrace. He placed the last seed carefully. The humans chose compassion, he continued, and they backed that choice with steel and blood, and now we must choose to be worthy of their sacrifice. How do we do that? Pilith asked. By remembering, Veeth said, and by teaching, and by never allowing our children to forget that, when we asked for refuge, humans sent builders and medics and a gunship patrol, and by doing so, they gave us more than just survival, and they gave us hope. Weeks later, the Garden of Two Worlds opened to the public, and Thessarans gathered to see earth plants growing alongside their native species. The lotus flowers bloomed in brilliant colors, and the water lilies spread their leaves across the surface of the central pool. And Thessaran algae intertwined with earth moss in patterns that seemed almost intentional. Opening ceremony before her departure, and she stood with Veeth as they watched children play among the plants. It is beautiful, she said. It is a promise, Veeth replied. A promise that we will remember what you did for us, and that we will strive to be the kind of people who deserve such friendship. Chen placed a hand on Veeth's shoulder in the human gesture of comfort and companionship. You already are, she said. When Chen departed 3 months later, the entire Thessaran population of Haven Station gathered to say goodbye, and they sang a harmonic farewell that moved several humans to tears. Veeth watched her shuttle lift away from the docking bay and disappear into the stars, and he felt both sadness and gratitude. The humans had given them refuge when no one else would. They had built them a home when they could have provided mere transport. They had defended them with their lives when they could have simply watched from safety. And they had stayed to ensure that refuge meant something permanent. Veeth turned from the window and made his way back to the central plaza, where the memorial wall stood. He placed his manipulators on the stone and felt the names carved into its surface. We will remember, he said to the dead, and we will teach our children to remember, and your sacrifice will echo through generations. Behind him, the station hummed with life and purpose. Thessaron and human working together, building together, living together. And if the Crawl or anyone else ever threatened Haven Station again, they would find not just human warships waiting, but Thessaron volunteers who had learned that peace was worth preserving, and that sometimes preservation required strength.